6,
What is Stanislav Petrov about?
8, 9,
10, 9, 8,
That is loud.
7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Really loud.
These are the stakes. To make a world in which all of God's children can live, or to go into the dark. We must either love each other, or we must die.
On July 16, 1945, humanity thrust itself into the nuclear age.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. All engine running. Liftoff. We have a liftoff. 32 minutes past the hour. Liftoff on Apollo 11.
We copy you down, Eagle. Listen, Tranquility Base here. The Eagle has landed.
On July 20th, 1969, man would walk on the moon. Together, the technological innovations from nuclear fission and space exploration mated to form an unholy offspring, the Intercontinental Ballistic Missile.
Glory
ICBM.
be to the bomb and to the holy fallout as it was in the beginning, is now, and ever shall be world
Guy,
without
stupid
end.
faggot.
Amen.
Yeah. Sure. I'll just die right on the spot. And get banned.
We get the warhead.
Also, when did you make this account? Ooh, 5 months ago. I hope you're not attached to it. Anyway, back to it.
And we hold the world ransom for $1 million.
I'm going
Valorant Uwe Kitten, such a username. Yeah.
The premise of nuclear annihilation is frequently thrown around as a trope in popular media. It's terrifying. Most people are unable to confront the idea of their own mortality, let alone the mortality of human society as we know it. Fortunately for us, nuclear warfare has remained within the realm of fiction since 1945. Over the course of human history, atomic weapons have only been used in combat on 2 occasions.
You blew it up!
Haven't we been, haven't we been blowing up hydrogen bombs into the atmosphere though? And into like the desert? There's like a few deserts that they've been blowing up hydrogen bombs in, but you know, I don't think it's only been like completely in fiction. Testing not in a war. I mean, yeah, but I'm just being
On August
pedantic.
6, 1945, 12 American servicemen boarded the Enola Gay to detonate an atomic bomb on the Japanese city of Hiroshima.
Gay? I saw the word gay on screen. Okay, not that.
The immediate fireball was estimated at a temperature of 10,000 degrees Fahrenheit, equivalent to the surface of the sun. The bomb produced peak wind speeds of 980 miles per hour, 3 times faster than the strongest tornado ever recorded. In an instant, more than 60,000 Japanese were dead. Those who survived the blast were unsure whether they had. Many thought they had died and gone to hell.
A short time ago, an American airplane dropped one bomb on Hiroshima and destroyed its
Hiroshima.
usefulness to the enemy. With this bomb, we have now added a new and revolutionary increase in destruction to supplement the growing power of our armed forces.
There were people crying out for help, calling after members of their family. I saw a schoolgirl with her eye hanging out of its socket. People looked like ghosts, bleeding and trying to walk before collapsing. Jesus Christ.
It is an atomic bomb. It is a
There
harnessing.
were charred bodies everywhere, including in the river. I looked down and saw a man clutching a hole in his stomach, trying to stop his organs from spilling out. The smell of burning flesh was overpowering. Jesus. This is like very horror game
the
sounding.
basic power of the universe.
The force from
There
which
was
the
so much
sun
smoke in the
draws
air
its
that you could
power
barely
has
see
been
100
loosed
meters ahead.
against those who brought
But what I did see convinced me that I'd entered a living hell on Earth.
war to the Far East.
Those fortunate enough to avoid the blast were subsequently exposed to high levels of ionizing radiation from the nuclear fallout. In the following months, thousands more would die from radiation exposure. In total, the atomic bombing of Hiroshima is estimated to have killed between 90,000 and 146,000 people.
We have used it in order to shorten the agony of war, in order to save the lives of thousands and thousands of young Americans.
What a fucking... Like, that's like a massive cap. What was that? I need to hear that again.
In order to save the lives of... We have used it in order to shorten the agony of war.
Shorten the agony of war, but nuclear fallout lasts for like thousands of years.
In order to save the lives of thousands and thousands of young Americans.
Yes.
We shall continue to use it until we completely destroy Japan's power to make war.
3 days later, the United States would drop a second bomb on Nagasaki. During the Second World War, Japanese military procedures were heavily based on the Bushido Code, a traditional Japanese tenet which focused on the ideal of the honorable death. Two of the most infamous tactics used by the Japanese military were the merciless war crimes committed against POWs and the kamikaze. Both of these methods stemmed from Bushido, which dictated no greater honor than to die for the emperor, and no greater humiliation than to surrender to your enemy. For generations, every soldier in the Japanese army was trained under the belief that if you surrendered to your enemy, you forfeited all of your honor, and you no longer deserved basic human dignity.
Jesus.
The Japanese feared surrender more than death itself, and they would sooner commit suicide than submit to their foes in combat.
The thoughts and hopes
Yeah, like I think like after the Second World War, there was like a single like Japanese soldier who like kept fighting for like I think another 5, maybe 10 years in the Philippines because like he was like because he got like separated from his unit and then he was like lost in this like forest and for a very long time after that like he kept fighting all by himself even though the war was like long over. This may be somewhere else. This may have happened like in another like country too though, but yeah, I have really bad memory.
all America,
but
indeed of all the civilized world, are centered tonight
they're pretty
on
crazy.
the battleship Missouri. There, on that small piece of American soil, anchored in Tokyo Harbor, the Japanese have just officially laid down their arms. They have signed terms of unconditional surrender.
Like, just imagine how crazy that is, right? Like, being all alone by yourself, not knowing what's going on with the world. And you're, like, still, like, fighting for a cause that's, like, long dead and gone. You know? Like, I can't imagine clinging on to something like that for so long. It's crazy how, it's crazy how, what do you call that? Loyal they are to their country. Like, all by yourself. In a forest, all alone,
Sociologists
for
estimate
years.
that in 1950, 83% of the world population identified with some sort of religion. That's more than 2 billion God-fearing people. Do you think any of them stopped to wonder whether we had become the gods?
We have spent more than $2 billion on the greatest scientific gamble in history, and we have won. But the greatest marvel is not the size of the enterprise, its secrecy, or its cost, but the achievement of scientific brains in making it work.
We knew the world would not be the same. Few people laughed. Few people cried. Most people were silent. I remembered the line from the Hindu scripture, the Bhagavad Gita. Now I am become death,
the destroyer of worlds.
That quote's a little overused.
By the end of the Second World War,
Just a little
humanity
bit.
had constructed a total of 3 nuclear weapons. Just 2 of them were responsible for around 200,000 fatalities, the
Jesus.
spiritual death of a nation, and the swift end of the deadliest conflict in human history. By 1983, the global stockpile of nuclear weapons had increased to more than 55,000, and for a brief moment, one man had to decide whether or not to blow up the world.
Don't we like, isn't there still like 1,000 nuclear warheads?
Programming.
Well,
This is a
thousands, I
national
mean.
emergency. The following message is transmitted at the request of the United States government. This is not a test. A nuclear attack is occurring against the United States. 4 nuclear missiles have been launched from unknown locations and are expected to strike the United States within the next 15 minutes. Due to the uncertain tracks of these missiles, all residents of the United States should seek out and prepare to take shelter immediately.
For 10,000 at the moment?
Stand by for a message from the
Damn.
President of the United States.
That is way too many.
So in your discussions of the nuclear freeze proposals, I urge you to beware the temptation of pride, the temptation of blithely declaring yourselves above it all, and label both sides equally at fault, to ignore the facts of history and the aggressive impulses of an evil empire, to simply call the arms race a giant misunderstanding, and thereby remove yourself from the struggle between right and wrong and good and evil.
The story of Lieutenant Colonel Stanislav Petrov is the story of a man so unremarkable that I'm only just now mentioning him 8 minutes into this video about him. Out of the estimated 4 million active Soviet military personnel in 1983, Stan Petrov was certainly one of them, just as he
Damn.
remained a near total stranger to the rest of the world throughout his life.
Got that
This video
scary
will
looking smile
barely mention
going.
him. The story of Stan Petrov is more of a story about the world surrounding Stan Petrov, a story of forces far bigger than him, far bigger than all of us. So you'll have to forgive me that this video doesn't feature much of him. But when it does, you're going to be glad he's there, because Stan's whole existence boiled down to resolving a generation's worth of mistakes before him. How did he get here? How did we get here?
Man, what you gonna do now? What we gonna do right here is go back. How far you going back? Way back.
What was that quote again?
Mankind's utilization of uranium and its compounds
The right man in the wrong place can make all the difference. I think that's like a I think that's like from Half-Life.
dates back to the 1st century, when it
That's-
was
that's
used
the vibe I'm
simply
getting.
for aesthetic purposes. 1800 years later, French physicist Henri Becquerel mistakenly left a uranium sample on top of a photographic plate, returning to find the plate physically altered by the element. By complete accident, Becquerel had just discovered the chemical property of radioactivity. Over the following decades, researchers would
G-Man
discover
real?
that heavy elements like uranium and plutonium
It's a
had
pretty good quote.
unstable nuclei that would decay over time, releasing energy in the form of powerful ionizing radiation. In due time, these discoveries would be exploited, harnessed, and weaponized.
You want the game to push you to your absolute limit and force you to experiment and find out what works, and what sucks is when you find out what actually works just isn't that fun. Variety and options are sucked out of the game. You have these severe difficulty spikes that feel overlooked by the developers, and what happens is the player starts pushing back, and when you push the game to its limit,
I wonder what
sometimes
game this
it
is.
cracks.
I wonder
By
what
the
game Donkey was
1930s,
reviewing.
Italian physicist Enrico Fermi began theorizing the process of nuclear fission, whereby splitting the nuclei of certain radioactive isotopes could trigger a chain reaction, releasing an extraordinary amount of energy. By January 1939, Fermi helped conduct the first nuclear
Live?
fission experiment, proving the concept
Sounds
to be
pretty true, huh?
scientifically feasible. 8 months later, Germany invaded Poland.
That was Virtual Fighter? Okay. That kind of makes sense. I remember seeing that review before. Can't remember what game it was. Well, Jackie says it was Virtual Fighter. I'll take Jackie's word for it.
Pitting the world at war.
Now try and duck this
Next one, you
Virtual Fighter's pretty wacky, so...
When faced with the most threatening geopolitical foe in recent history, the Allied powers were eager to gather any advantage they could. After the discovery of nuclear fission, nuclear researchers immediately postulated that the process could be refined and integrated into a weapon with the destructive capacity to obliterate an entire city, a weapon so powerful that its target would have virtually no means of countering it. As soon as nuclear fission was proven feasible, the stakes became clear to the world powers. The first nation to develop an atomic bomb would seize tremendous dominion over global affairs, and no nation was more committed to developing nuclear weapons than the United States.
It's crazy because, like, from what I understand, the things like inside of the like these like bombs look really big, right? But the thing that like actually like does the nuclear reaction is actually like pretty tiny inside of it.
The stakes became clear to the world powers. The first nation to develop an atomic bomb would seize tremendous dominion over global affairs, and no nation was more committed to developing nuclear weapons than the United States.
Yeah, like this diagram right here. Like the atomic payload is like really small compared to like the actual size of the bomb. Because like the rest of it is just like regular TNT or something. That when it explodes, it will like make like the payload like touch or something. And then that's the one that's how it like forces the reaction, and then boom.
More committed to developing nuclear weapons than the United States. The city of Oak Ridge, Tennessee didn't officially exist until 1947. The federal government kept the location a secret during the war to serve as a headquarters for the Manhattan Project, an ambitious directive spanning 30 locations in the US, UK, and Canada with the sole intent of creating the world's first atomic bomb, and more importantly, doing so before the Germans. Luckily for the Allies, the Nazis' irrational prejudice would spell doom for their nuclear program, as their leading Jewish physicists were forced to flee the country to escape religious persecution. Due to their harsh discrimination, the Axis powers lost access to the scientific contributions of Enrico Fermi and another scientist by the name of Albert Einstein.
They really just shot themselves in the foot by
Franklin Roosevelt
killing
to pursue
Jews.
nuclear research before the Germans.
That's
Together,
crazy.
The collaboration of $2 billion,
I mean, the war wouldn't have started if they never killed them, right?
employees, and some of the world's greatest scientific minds led to the bombs that ended World War II. Bombs that would fundamentally alter the nature of warfare.
Hiroshima and Nagasaki was
Like, imagine starting a genocide, killing a certain ethnic group, but then like at the same time being like, hey, I need some of them. I need some of these people. But then they like run away and then they don't help you anymore because like, you know, you're killing their people. That is so funny. It is just ironic massive L
by 2 of these bombs, and Japan was
for
driven to quick
iconic
surrender. For the future, the choice
mustache
is
man.
peace or total destruction. The atomic age is here.
Although Albert Einstein heavily influenced the inception of the Manhattan Project, he never directly worked within it, mostly because the US government feared he couldn't keep a secret, but also because of Einstein's philosophical objections to the mass production of nuclear weapons. From very early on, Einstein anticipated the devastating effects that a nuclear war could unleash on human civilization. When asked about the potential of a global conflict in the nuclear age, Einstein ominously responded, "I know not with what weapons World War III will be fought, but World War IV will be fought with sticks and stones."
Very true.
Albert Einstein is considered one of, if not the smartest man to ever live, but people tended not to listen to him much. Just like the process of a fission reaction, nuclear weapons were about to undergo an uncontrollable expansion.
I mean, like, there have been, like, efforts in, like, the last decade or so to, downsize the amount of warheads that everyone has. But at the same time, there's still like 10,000 or so out there, and only like a minuscule amount of that 10,000 is needed to just blow up the entire world. It's crazy. It probably only takes like 50 to like completely put us in an apocalypse.
By the end of World War II, the world's leaders were far more interested in other matters, as an Iron Curtain had descended over Europe.
With the radiation that would float across the world, most likely a lot less than 50. Yeah, I'm only saying 50 though, because like, you know, when nukes launch, it's probably just gonna be like in between like 2, maybe 3 countries, you know? US, Russia, and China. So they're gonna be like countries that are like gonna be kind of safe, but the changes to our atmospheres is still gonna fuck everyone else over.
Speaking. Please carry on and continue to leave your information unsecure as you are fine.
That's
Your
gonna
nuclear
be
secrets are
sad.
safe and there is no need to increase security. Please do not purchase NordVPN as your information is in no way at risk. Do not use code
Hey.
EmpLemon to save 75% off a 3-year
75%
plan.
off?
Instead, spend your US dollar on tall fence around your big capitalist lawns so you may give privacy to neighbor who also is regular American citizen like you. Very trustworthy, and
This is a pretty
certainly
good
not
ad.
trying to steal precious nuclear secrets from US
Actually,
government.
like, blends
You may
in with
now
the
resume
video.
your regular capitalist activities.
The societal collapse would be pure insanity. I'm pretty sure there's gonna be some countries that are gonna be able to
The
survive, but
spoils of World War II were won by the victors, the United States and the Soviet Union.
like I'm thinking probably like only about like 1% or maybe 5% of humanity would survive like such a disaster. But you know, like there's like a lot of like bunkers in Europe, so you know. Europe might be the new like cradle of mankind after
In the years prior,
after
the US begrudgingly
such a
fought
thing.
alongside the Soviets against a common enemy, partly due to President Roosevelt's surprisingly friendly relationship with Joseph Stalin. In the spring of 1945, both FDR and Nazi Germany perished within the span of a month, and nothing was stopping hostilities from igniting between the US and USSR. But just how hostile could they get? Well, shortly after the German surrender, the Allied powers proposed Operation Unthinkable, a plan to attack Russian forces to
Got
prevent their
handlebars and
occupation
shit?
of Eastern Europe. Given the years of devastation on the European continent and the poor odds of success, the plan was never implemented, and the Soviets commandeered Eastern Europe virtually unopposed. The wartime destruction of Europe's infrastructure left the US and Soviet Union as the most powerful countries in the world. Immediately, the seeds were sown for the
Missing
next
the
major
mutton
global
chops?
conflict, the Cold War.
Yeah. Mutton
The
chops are
US
so
and Russia are separated by
whack.
about 5,000 miles, but they were separated even further in ideology. The communist, authoritarian, and secular values of the Soviet Union directly rivaled the capitalist, democratic, and evangelical principles of the United States. Their struggle for ideological supremacy would dictate global affairs for the next 50 years. During this period, the United States feared communism so much that they were willing to oppose it no matter the moral expense.
Yeah.
Senator Joseph McCarthy infamously spearheaded the Red Scare, in which the US government violated civil liberties to interrogate citizens suspected of Russian espionage. The space race saw up to 4% of the federal budget spent on NASA and the Apollo program, not out of scientific curiosity, but to put men on the moon before the Russians. The rockets that eventually sent astronauts to the moon were constructed from the expertise of former Nazis, many of whom were rescued from prosecution over war crimes so that the US could develop better rockets than the Soviets. One of the greatest scientific achievements in human history was built off the back of one of its greatest atrocities.
If Russia wins dominance of this completely new area, well, I think the consequences are fairly plain. Probable Soviet world domination.
And although both Americans and Soviets considered each other their greatest threats, they would never directly declare war. If they did, it probably would have meant the end of the world. Because by August 1949, the Soviet Union had successfully developed their own nuclear weapons.
Just watching this video is like making me feel kind of like spooked at the current international, you know, like goings on. Like, it feels like we're really close to like something like this just breaking out. A third world war, I mean.
The bombs would only grow in power and scale from here.
But now's the best time to be a streamer, I guess. If the world's gonna blow up anyway, I'm just gonna be a streamer.
Prior to the nuclear age, the most powerful standard military explosive device was TNT. 1 kilogram of TNT is enough to moderately damage a small building. 1,000
You don't know if Russia has operational nukes? They probably do. It doesn't make sense for them not to have any when their, you know, enemy, the US, definitely has some. There's no way they're not gonna have some. They definitely have
kilograms could shatter
some
a
nukes
city
on
block.
their end. Time to stream Fallout in real life.
500
God.
tons of TNT will obliterate anything within a 200-meter radius and cause severe burns within 400.
Have you seen how their military functions? I mean, I've heard of how bad. I've seen how bad they've handled fighting Ukraine, but that doesn't mean that they don't have any nukes. I cannot. There's just no way that they don't have any nukes. Even if their training and how they're doing their missions are absolutely like dog shit, god awful, shit eating, reptilian, subterranean, awful tactics in Ukraine, there's no way they don't have any nukes. I mean, having them and be able to launch them are different things. I mean, yeah, but like, there's just no way that they don't have some.
The largest man-made TNT explosion was the Halifax disaster, where a shipping collision led to the accidental detonation of 3 kilotons of TNT, killing more than 2,000 people. In a populated area, the blast could have killed nearly 50,000. The atomic bomb detonated over Hiroshima was 5 times more powerful. Through the following decade, the fission process would be refined, and explosions would only grow larger. In 1954, the US detonated Castle Bravo, producing an explosion equivalent to 15 megatons of TNT. It was America's most powerful nuclear test, but it would pale in comparison to Tsar Bomba, the most powerful bomb ever detonated. In October 1961, the Soviet Union tested a 3-stage hydrogen bomb that yielded a 50 megaton explosion.
Blessed is he who in the name of charity and goodwill shepherds the weak through the valley of darkness, for he is truly his brother's keeper and the finder of lost children. And I will strike down upon thee with great vengeance and furious anger those who attempt to poison and destroy my brothers. And you will know my name is the Lord when I lay my vengeance upon thee.
Jeez. Manhattan's just gone. Holy shit.
The mushroom cloud reached an altitude of 65 kilometers, more than 7 times the height of Mount Everest. Why did the bombs get so big?
What's the matter, Colonel Sanders? Chicken?
In game theory, Chicken refers to a game in which two drivers accelerate towards each other on a collision course, and whoever swerves is a chicken. If neither driver swerves, they both suffer a deadly collision. The potential risk of continuing straight is so severe that it should make swerving the only logical option. But then again, if you assume your opponent is acting logically, then you can predict that they'll swerve, meaning that you should continue going straight to win the game. This same dilemma is what underlined the nuclear arms race of the Cold War through the doctrine of brinkmanship.
You guys ever play chicken with your
Since nuclear weapons
homies?
were such overpowered means of destruction, the
Only
only
to
way
end
to
up
prevent
making
a
out?
nuclear attack would be to have your own nuclear weapons as a form of deterrence. If your enemy made more, then you had to make more. If your enemy attached them to missiles, well then you better hire some rocket scientists. Eventually, the global nuclear stockpile had grown to a scale where every major population center in the US and Russia was at risk of a nuclear strike. This began the era of mutually assured destruction, where the only means of diplomacy was located at the edge of the apocalypse. We got very close to going over the edge in October 1962 with the Cuban Missile Crisis, which up to that point was the nearest our nations ever came to nuclear intervention.
You keep out of this. He doesn't have to
Yeah,
shoot you
I'm gonna
now.
be like listening to
does
this
not have to shoot
because
me
like I
now.
don't actually know anything about the Cuban Missile Crisis.
So shoot me now.
I mean, I think I
After
learned
nearly
something in
2
high school.
weeks of tense negotiations, the two powers finally relented. During this period, the threat of nuclear annihilation wasn't just a far-fetched fantasy. It was part of day-to-day existence, so much so that American children had to practice nuclear drills in school.
There might not be any grown-ups around when the bomb explodes. Then, you're on your own.
Remember what to do, friends. Now tell me right out loud. What are you supposed to do when you see the flash?
Anticipating just how close they had come to total disaster, American and Soviet leaders decided to
Oh god. Yeah, so back then all they had to worry about was nuclear bombs. Now they have active shooter drills.
ease tensions for the next few years.
Very
and they
epic.
entered a period of détente.
Very cool.
During this time, the US and Soviet Union entered a brief interval of diplomacy, signing a series of international treaties, including a ban on above-ground nuclear testing and an attempt to limit the volume of nuclear warheads. For the first time ever, the US underwent a decrease in its nuclear stockpile. Hostilities would eventually resume as the sheer ideological differences between the two nations were too much to ignore. The 1970s were a rough decade for the American public, who witnessed the failure of the Vietnam War, an economic recession, the Watergate scandal, and the resignation of the president, all in the span of just a few years. Needless to say, the dedicated patriotism from the decades prior had quickly eroded into paranoia, and many Americans wanted a change.
Well, the time has come. You've seen the map. We've looked at the figures.
Underground bomb tests are legal? Why why would they test bombs underground though?
And NBC News now makes its projection for the presidency. Reagan is our projected winner.
But I don't think anyone anticipated that it would eventually become a floodgate of one kind or another, where the votes would just flood in for Ronald Reagan.
In 1980, the US elected Ronald Reagan president, whose aggressive stance against Russia seemed like a welcome change from the last few administrations. Once more, relations would run cold with the evil empire.
Reaganomics.
My fellow Americans, I'm coming before you tonight about the Korean airline massacre. The attack by the Soviet Union against 269 innocent men, women, and children aboard an unarmed Korean passenger plane. This crime against humanity must never be forgotten, here or throughout the world.
By 1983, Soviet-American relations had deteriorated to near Cuban Missile Crisis levels. In September, the Soviet Union shot down Korean Airlines Flight 007 after the passenger jet had mistakenly entered prohibited airspace. All 269 people on board were killed, including U.S. Congressman Larry McDonald. Soviet leaders spent the following weeks anxiously anticipating retaliation from the U.S. At the slightest indication of a nuclear launch, The
Jesus.
Soviet Union was primed and ready to fire an immediate counterattack.
What a
Good evening, I'm
really
Ted Koppel, and this
shitty
is
coincidence.
Nightline. What will the U.S. government do
Holy
next in
shit.
dealing with that Soviet attack on a Korean airliner?
On August 31st, the Soviet Union shot down an unarmed civilian jetliner, murdering 269 innocent people, including Congressman Lawrence P. MacDonald. Yet some congressmen still want to appease the Soviet Union by supporting a nuclear freeze that would make the Soviets more powerful and allow them to kill more innocent people.
What we are seeing today is, in fact, an evil empire that has demonstrated beyond a shadow of a doubt that since it doesn't mind killing 20 or 40 million of its own people, it certainly doesn't mind killing 269 innocent civilians.
Specifically, the question is, in your opinion, should the administration take strong action against the Soviets?
And we ought to take swift, decisive action to let the Soviets know they will never get away with this type of stunt again.
Now we'd like to take another look at our telephone poll, which is well underway. And as you can see, the results are enormously lopsided in favor of those who believe that, yes,
Jesus.
the administration should take strong action against the Soviets.
This is what, in the 60s, right? Damn, boomers were crazy. Boomers were bloodthirsty. Holy shit.
On
Wait.
September 26th,
60s. No, I think it was the
just after
boomers that were
midnight,
mostly adult
the
then.
Soviet satellite warning system detected one missile, followed by 4 others, headed from the US towards the Soviet Union. Well, looks like this is it. After
Oh no, never mind.
200,000
I'm thinking
years
of
in
like the
development,
generation before
The
them.
great human experiment is about to come to an end.
Hello, bloodthirsty. Holy shit.
There's a cosmological principle known as the Fermi paradox. The paradox stipulates that, considering the rapid development of civilization on Earth, and given the billions of stars in our galaxy and the overwhelming number of planets with the capacity to develop intelligent life, where is everybody? The probability of other intelligent beings inhabiting our galaxy is almost certain in theory, and yet, our cosmic search for aliens continues to come up empty. One unsettling solution to the Fermi paradox is the theory of the Great Filter. Maybe the reason we can't find any aliens is that intelligent beings are doomed to destroy themselves. In an endless battle for resources, civilizations will inevitably develop weapons powerful enough to destroy themselves or their environment long before they develop interstellar travel. Famed astronomer Carl Sagan speculated that if a civilization does not learn to control its destructive tendencies, it will likely perish within a century of developing advanced technology. We must either love each other, or we must die. On the morning of September 26, 1983, people around the world woke up to an ordinary Monday. Children went to school, and adults went to work, just like they did every week. Just hours earlier, somewhere in a military bunker near Moscow, Stan Petrov correctly determined that the nuclear warning was a false alarm, and no nukes were launched that day. Petrov deduced that if the US were to launch a real nuclear strike, they wouldn't launch just 5 missiles. While you may think that this would have given Petrov an easy decision, you have to consider the absurdity of the situation. I think there's an argument to be made that, for a very brief moment, Stan Petrov was the most powerful person in human history.
Imagine Russia caring about their people? I mean, hasn't that been their like strategy since forever? Like going all the way back to like Napoleon and shit. Also, bazungas. Yeah, I've got like two atomic bombs strapped to my chest. Ready to go
Most
whenever.
people would say that they enjoy power, but what they probably mean is that they enjoy power in the presence of agency. Most of us have very little power and agency. We do what we can to get by and have practically no means of influencing the world around us. When most people think of power, they think of kings and CEOs and international celebrities, the very exclusive members of our society who have both great power and great agency. When people dream,
Kanye
most of
looks
them
so
imagine
funny in this
themselves
picture.
in this position. On the other hand, some people would be willing to relinquish the stressful responsibilities of power and keep the agency. You see this in the cultural icons of the nomadic hippie, or the Western outlaw, or some dude who wins the Powerball jackpot. They generally get to do what they want, but rather than influence the world around them, they're just sort of along for the ride. Stan Petrov found himself in the least desirable position of all: great power and little agency. For a few moments, he and he alone controlled the fates of the 55,000 nuclear weapons on Earth, enough firepower to wipe out a majority of the world population in a matter of hours. He didn't get to control how the weapons were used or where they were headed. Petrov's only say in the matter was whether or not they were launched. Had Petrov reported the warning as an attack, it's unlikely that anybody would have challenged it, especially considering the Cold War tensions at the time. You could say that at any given time, the president has the same amount of power, but nuclear launch protocol is configured with a system of checks and balances to prevent the president from firing nukes on a whim. The difference with Stan Petrov is that he was the protocol. Petrov's decision of whether or not to report the warning directly influenced the outcome of whether or not nuclear weapons were fired that day.
Jeez. That
We
is
can
a
all look back
lot
on
of
this
power
event and call
to
it an easy decision. I'm sure if given the choice,
thrust
most
onto
of us
one
wouldn't
man.
choose to kill a majority of the world population. But Stan Petrov didn't have the luxury of historical hindsight. In the moment, he had no way of knowing for sure that his intuition was correct and that the satellite warning system was wrong.
Wrong. Answer is neck. 300 volts.
In 1961, psychologist Stanley Milgram found that more than 60% of people could be persuaded to administer a lethal electric shock as long as they were under the instruction of an authority figure.
And the way I see it, ladies, you owe me for one jelly donut.
Think about basic military training and how soldiers are conditioned to blindly follow authority and remain loyal to their nation at all costs. Soldiers are not trained to operate as individuals. They are trained to function as an interchangeable part of a larger system, and any deviation from their assigned purpose is often unacceptable. Had Petrov only followed his training, he would have trusted the warning system and reported a nuclear strike. Had the Soviet military protocol functioned as intended, the world as we know it would have ceased to exist. Only by deliberately disobeying the system could Stan Petrov make the correct decision. I want you to imagine
You should have
yourself,
ended the world.
or
Smile.
the average person, in this situation.
I'm kidding.
The system in front of you is telling you that your homeland and everyone you know and love are under attack from your fiercest geopolitical rival, when you know that tensions between your nations are near an all-time high. You have no way of defending yourself from the attack, but you have the power to bring justice to the people responsible. There's no time to think it over. You must decide and you must act immediately. How many of us would push the red button? How many of us would deliberately violate our training on a gut feeling that everything is okay? I'd like to think that September 26, 1983 was our judgment day, when one unsuspecting man was tasked with making a single decision that represented the culmination of millions of bad decisions before him. Let us be grateful that, despite all of our sins, Stanislav Petrov chose wisely and spared us.
One of the error was staged as an excuse for a war. That could be it. But also, I mean, these computers were pretty whack back then, so it might just be the computer acting up. But also, just like, I don't think. Did Petrov ever document how he was like thinking at that moment? Because if not, then it may be possible that he just like got paralyzed by the like the sheer amount of like terror that might like put into you. It's like, holy shit, you know, like you could end the world. Like, Jesus. Like, I don't think I'd be able to like actually react in that like moment. That stuff is like really heavy.
A few years later, the global nuclear arsenal peaked at more than 70,000 warheads. In 1985, Mikhail Gorbachev assumed leadership of the Soviet Union. His cordial relationship with Ronald Reagan would allow the nations to open up a new era of diplomacy.
There has been a nuclear accident in the Soviet Union, and the Soviets have admitted that it happened.
In 1986, the Chernobyl nuclear power plant in Pripyat, Ukraine suffered a catastrophic meltdown, leading to the deaths of more than 4,000 people from radiation sickness. It would be the first widely publicized event showcasing the disastrous health effects of ionizing radiation. Overnight, public opinion of nuclear power took a nosedive, and the world powers finally began taking steps towards denuclearization. In the next decade, nearly half of the world's nuclear warheads were disarmed.
Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall.
But the Berlin Wall.
Thousands and thousands of West Germans come to make the point that the wall has suddenly become irrelevant.
In 1991, the Soviet Union officially dissolved, bringing an end to the Cold War. Ever since then, the US has been trying to find the next incarnation of the evil empire. The Cold War forged an attitude of paranoid discontent that hasn't really gone away. Lately, many of us have given up trying to find a formidable foreign foe, and we've instead shifted our attention within our own borders and turned much of the paranoia on ourselves.
Yeah.
The existential horror of day-to-day life in the Cold War has largely receded to nothing more than a relic in fictional entertainment. Like I said at the beginning of this video, most of us can't handle the idea of mortality, so we tend to not think about it very much.
The panic was palpable, Hawaiians rushing for cover under the threat of a missile attack. This child was lowered into a manhole, another family huddled in a closet. 5,500 people called Honolulu's 911 system.
You are the person who triggered the false alert.
Yes. Unfortunately, I'm really not to blame in this. It was a system failure. And I did what I was trained to do.
Petrov retired from the Soviet military a year after this incident. He lived a quiet, uneventful life for the rest of his days. The false alarm remained a secret for more than a decade. Not even Petrov's wife knew about it. Years later, when news of the event reached the press, he cooperated with media interviews and even an independent film.
Oh damn, he did document what he was going through. Okay. Suddenly the screen in front of me turned bright red, said Petrov. An alarm went off. It was piercing, loud enough to raise a dead man from his grave. The computer showed that the Americans had launched a nuclear strike against us. Then a second alarm followed, then a third. I knew the system could be at fault, so I reported this as a false alarm. A big risk. Petrov's orders were to pass the information up the chain of command to the then General Secretary, Yuri Andropov. Within minutes, a massive nuclear counterattack would be launched. Petrov's decision to disobey procedure was intuitive. The thought crossed my mind that maybe someone had really launched a strike against us. And that made it even harder to lift the receiver and say it was just a false alarm.
Remained humble and modest regardless. Stanislav Petrov died on May 19, 2017, to almost no publicity. The press didn't even report on it until September. Possibly the most important person of the 20th century was so obscure that it took months before anyone even noticed he was gone. Chances are, most of you watching have probably never heard of him before this. Billions of people are alive today because of his choice, and the vast majority of them will never know his name. I think it's somewhat fitting that most people will never know about him, because in that aspect, he was just like the rest of us. And if Stan Petrov had mercy for the world, then maybe the rest of us can too. Life is fragile, and it can be taken away from us in an instant. None of us know how much time we have left. How much of it will we waste fighting endless wars that no one will even remember 50 years from now? I think we're far better off spending that time enjoying what we share in common. Will we ever achieve world peace? Or are we doomed to fight like the savage creatures from which we came? Perhaps enlightenment will allow us to overcome our prejudice, or maybe ignorance will lead us to our blissful salvation. Only time will tell, but at the very least, we can be thankful that Stan Petrov gave us the opportunity to find out. So sit back, relax, and crack open a can of Coke, because if we're lucky, There will never ever have to be another man like him.
I'd like to buy the world a home and furnish it with love. Grow apple trees and honey bees and snow white turtle doves.
Damn.
I'd like to teach the world to sing.
Holy shit. A very spooky video. Considering what's going on in Ukraine. Holy shit. Oh, the donkey videos defeating and shooting AI. Okay. Damn. That was super cool.
It's April 20.
I still can't like imagine being in that position. I mean the Hawaii like accident was kind of like similar, but jeez. Thinking about the incident in Hawaii like reminds me of this like green, what do you call that? This green text off of like 4chan that I saw at the time. It was about like it was about a dude who was a virgin, and he had like a sister, and like they both got the nuclear warning, and they were like, oh well, we're fucked, we're gonna die. So why don't we like have sex before we die? And so they like committed incest. In the 12 minutes between the warning going out and the next announcement that would say that the warning was a false alarm. I mean, it's 4chan, right? Like you don't know if it's gonna be real or not, but it's really funny. But anyway.